In a torrential downpour that blurred the lines between night and memory, I sat motionless in the dim glow of our living room, my heart pounding a staccato rhythm of realization. The whispered secrets of a midnight phone call had finally reached me, a truth so bitter and cold that it threatened to shatter my very soul. My wife had been unfaithful. But rather than erupt in anger, I swallowed the rising tide of betrayal and resolved to let silence be my blade. Every rain-soaked second that passed etched a quiet promise in my mind. I would pretend not to know, and in that hushed inaction, craft a masterpiece of silent revenge. I had always believed our marriage was built on unspoken trust and mutual understanding, a delicate equilibrium that allowed us to navigate life's complexities together. 4 years, I cherished our routines, mornings over steaming cups of coffee, quiet evenings spent reading side by side, and whispered promises made in the dark. Yet beneath that carefully curated facade, subtle hints of change had begun to surface. A furtive glance at the phone, an uncharacteristic evasion when I asked about her day, the way her laughter no longer reached her eyes. At first, I dismissed these signs as the inevitable wear of time, as the human tendency to seek solace in small escapes. But on that stormy night, when a stray message revealed a name I'd never heard before, everything unraveled. I remember the moment vividly, coming home early from work and finding her phone left unlocked on the coffee table, a rare lapse, I told myself, a mistake of trust. My trembling hands hesitated before scrolling through a barrage of messages filled with intimate words and plans for secret meetings. The evidence was irrefutable and seared itself into my memory like acid. A chill settled over me as the realization took hold. My wife's heart had wandered into the arms of her boss, a man I had once admired for his integrity and respectability. In that dark hour, I felt a profound sorrow, not for myself alone, but for the loss of the woman I thought I knew. Yet, even as shock threatened to overwhelm me, a curious calm took root. I recalled the old adage that revenge is a dish best served cold, and in that moment, I decided that the most powerful weapon against betrayal was not explosive confrontation, but the silent, deliberate art of indifference. I would let the truth fester beneath a veneer of normalcy. I would continue to play the role of the unsuspecting husband, all the while orchestrating a calculated, invisible retribution that would reveal itself in due time. Over the following days, I meticulously observed her. I watched as she moved through our shared space with a practiced nonchalance, her smiles a little too rehearsed, her laughter echoing hollowly in rooms that once thrummed with genuine joy. I catalogued every moment of her subtle evasions, the way she would quickly change the subject when I mentioned work meetings, the lingering pauses before answering calls, the furtive glances over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Every detail was a brushstroke in the portrait of her infidelity, and I became both an unwilling witness and a quiet artist, capturing the slow decay of our intimacy. I made no immediate confrontation. Instead, I let the days slip by with an eerie normalcy that fooled everyone, except me. At dinner, I would ask gentle, almost casual questions about her day, all the while silently noting her responses, the slight hesitation, the overeager redirection of the conversation. At night, as I lay awake in our bed, the space beside me felt impossibly empty, a void filled with unspoken accusations. I began to construct an inner monologue, a silent soliloquy that became the blueprint for my revenge. I would let her think that I remained oblivious, that my love was unwavering even in the face of betrayal. But behind that mask of calm, I was building a strategy, a masterpiece of silent retribution designed to dismantle the life she had so carefully constructed. I delved into research, reading about the psychology of betrayal and revenge, the ways in which silence can be the deadliest weapon of all. I discovered that true vengeance lies not in grandiose gestures but in the slow erosion of trust and self-respect. With each passing day, I set small, deliberate traps, a casually placed question here, a suggestive remark there, aimed at exposing the truth without uttering a single accusatory word. I allowed her to believe that nothing had changed, that our marriage was as steadfast as ever, even as I quietly collected evidence of her continuing deception. My friends noticed nothing amiss. They marveled at my calm, my stoic acceptance of circumstances that would have driven anyone to despair. They saw a man who appeared to be coping, to be processing the betrayal with a quiet dignity that belied the tumult raging within him. But in the solitude of my own mind, every whispered doubt and every memory of her clandestine smiles fanned the flames of a silent, icy resolve. I began to document everything, dates, times, and details of her meetings, the subtle changes in her tone, the peculiar patterns in her behavior. This diary became my sacred ledger, a testament to the slow, methodical unraveling of a lie that I once believed was built on the foundation of our love. There were moments when I almost wished to confront her directly, to tear down the walls of deceit with one explosive revelation. But I held back, understanding that the true artistry of revenge lay in its quiet persistence. I would not become a man who shouted his pain to the world. Instead, I would let silence speak volumes. I continued to smile when she smiled, to nod when she laughed, all the while harboring a secret that slowly transformed my very essence. I found solace in small rituals, morning walks where I could clear my mind, evenings spent reading old letters that once made me feel cherished. Each action was a silent rebuke to the betrayal, a way of saying, I see you, but I will not crumble. In the depth of that internal struggle, I began to question not only her choices but also the nature of love and trust. Had I been so blinded by my own need to believe in the ideal of our union that I ignored the subtle signs of its decay? I questioned my own complicity in creating a world where silence was an acceptable response to betrayal. Yet, the more I pondered, the more I realized that the strength of my silent revenge was in its restraint. It was not about flaunting the truth, but about reclaiming control over my own destiny. I refused to be the victim of a narrative written by deceit. Instead, I would be the silent architect of my own redemption. I began to plan for a future where my actions would speak louder than words. I envisioned a life where, one day, the slow, inexorable consequences of my silent revenge would force her to confront the reality of her choices. I imagined moments when the weight of the accumulated evidence would become undeniable, a moment when she would realize that the very silence she had taken for granted was the sharpest knife of all. In my mind, I painted a vivid picture of that day, a day when the truth, built brick by careful brick over weeks of quiet endurance, would come crashing down upon her like a tidal wave of regret. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the storm of my inner turmoil gradually subsided into a steady, unyielding resolve, I continued to live with an unspoken secret. I became the man who pretended not to know, who smiled through the pain, all while meticulously crafting a masterpiece of silent revenge that would, in time, force the truth into the light. I walked the fine line between love and betrayal, holding close to the memories of what we once had even as I forged a new path, a path defined not by the loud clamor of confrontation, but by the quiet power of a man who refused to be broken. This is the beginning of my journey, a journey where the ultimate revenge is not a fleeting moment of explosive confrontation, but a slow, deliberate reassertion of my own strength. I have learned that sometimes, the most devastating actions are those carried out in silence, where every quiet moment and every measured step becomes a part of an intricate plan for retribution. And as I continue to navigate the labyrinth of my own emotions, I remain steadfast in my belief that one day, the consequences of my silence will be revealed, and she will have no choice but to face the masterpiece of betrayal that I have so carefully constructed. In the days following that fateful discovery, I resolved to wage a quiet war. A slow, methodical campaign of subtle retaliation that no one would suspect came from the husband who appeared to remain unruffled. I mastered the art of keeping my emotions hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Every morning, as I sipped my coffee and exchanged pleasantries with my wife, I let the warmth of my smile belie the icy resolve building within me. I pretended not to notice the furtive glances she cast at her phone or the way her tone would change when I casually mentioned work meetings. Behind that calm exterior, I was meticulously plotting my silent revenge, a masterpiece of retribution that would unfold piece by piece without a single word of accusation. I began by creating an untraceable record of every detail. I purchased a discreet digital recorder and, under the guise of routine conversation, recorded every interaction, every seemingly trivial comment that now carried the weight of betrayal. I noted the time she excused herself to take a call, the manner in which she reread messages on her phone with a furtive smile, and even the subtle changes in her routine that now betrayed the presence of someone else. Each detail was catalogued in a private journal, an unyielding ledger of her duplicity that grew heavier with every passing day. At first, the days blurred together in an eerie calm. I carried on with our daily routines, shared breakfasts, evening strolls, and quiet dinners, always attentive, always listening, yet never revealing the storm that raged beneath the surface. Outwardly, I was the husband who forgave and forgot, who believed that love could overcome any obstacle. But every casual remark she made, every half-lidded smile when I glanced at her phone, was now fuel for my silent crusade. I began to study the psychology of betrayal and revenge, reading books and articles on the subject late into the night. I discovered that the most devastating revenge is not one delivered in a blaze of anger, but one that unfolds gradually, eroding the foundation of trust from within. I resolved that my retribution would be no different. I set about altering our routines subtly to expose the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I rearranged our daily schedule so that I could be present during the moments she would usually hide her phone under the pretext of privacy. I'd suggest taking a walk together in the late afternoon, or watching a movie in our private study where I knew she would feel compelled to keep her device close by. All the while, I maintained a disarming calm that made it appear as though nothing had changed. In those quiet moments, I would glance at her as she fidgeted with her phone, silently recording the subtle tells, a hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes darted away whenever our hands brushed, the slight tremor when she quickly minimized a conversation. Each observation was another brushstroke in the portrait of her betrayal. I also began gathering digital footprints. Late one night, while she slept soundly beside me, I connected her phone to my own secure network under the pretense of updating its software. I accessed logs and data, carefully copying information that indicated the time and location of her secret meetings. I did so with a precision that left no trace of tampering, a quiet infiltration into her world of hidden texts and clandestine emails. Every piece of data was stored in a secure folder on my computer, a silent archive that would one day be the cornerstone of my revenge. I knew that revealing the truth in the open would break her, but I intended to let the slow erosion of her carefully guarded lies do the work. Each new revelation, each proof of deception, deepened my resolve. The more I uncovered, the more I felt a cold detachment settle over me. I was no longer the man who had once believed in the sanctity of our vows. Instead, I became an observer, a quiet, calculating witness to the slow unraveling of a life built on betrayal. I watched as her behavior grew more erratic. There were times when she would receive a call and abruptly leave the room without a word, or when her eyes would glaze over as if lost in a secret thought that she dared not share. I catalogued these moments with clinical detachment, each entry in my journal a testament to the gradual collapse of the intimacy we once shared. Even as I immersed myself in this covert investigation, I continued to play the part of the unassuming husband. To the outside world, I was the picture of stoic resilience. Friends who noticed the subtle change in my demeanor attributed it to the natural ebb and flow of life's challenges. They saw a man who appeared to have accepted the burden of a broken heart with quiet dignity. They never suspected that beneath that calm facade was a carefully honed plan, a masterpiece of silent, methodical revenge that was unfolding in real time. I also began to engage in subtle acts that chipped away at the foundation of her secret world. I started taking control of aspects of our shared finances and digital communications, ensuring that I had access to information that might further reveal her hidden patterns. I rearranged our home's Wi-Fi settings so that certain devices logged their activity, and I learned how to track location data without raising any alarms. Every small maneuver was calculated to expose inconsistencies, to force her into a corner where the truth would eventually spill forth. Yet I never confronted her directly. I let the silence speak for itself, each unspoken act of retribution more devastating than any shout of accusation. There were moments of bitter irony that haunted me in the quiet hours before sleep. I would lie in bed, the darkness surrounding me as thick as my own thoughts, and I would replay every instance of her deception like a film on loop. But even as the images of her secret smiles and furtive glances burned in my mind, I felt a detached satisfaction. I was no longer a victim, powerless against the storm of betrayal. I had become its architect, its quiet avenger. In my heart, I nurtured a belief that the most exquisite revenge was one that left no visible scars, only the slow, inexorable erosion of a life built on lies. As weeks turned into months, the impact of my silent war began to manifest in subtle ways. I observed that the strain of maintaining my carefully composed exterior was beginning to take its toll on her. There were days when she seemed unusually exhausted, her once bright eyes shadowed by the weight of secrets that now pressed too heavily upon her. I watched her try to put on a brave face for friends and colleagues, only to see the facade crumble when she thought no one was looking. It was as if the silent pressure of my retribution, though unseen, was slowly eroding the very confidence she had once exuded. In one particularly tense evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, a meal that should have been filled with warmth and shared conversation, I noticed something different in her demeanor. While I maintained my calm, her gaze flickered nervously toward her phone, and her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. It was a small detail, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me it was another brick in the wall of evidence that she was living a double life. I made a mental note of it, adding it to my ever-growing ledger of silent transgressions. Each day, as the layers of deception piled higher, I refined my strategy. I started to let my silence become a weapon in itself, a passive, yet searing form of punishment that left her wondering, questioning, and ultimately, isolated in her own guilt. I refrained from casual touches, from the spontaneous laughter we once shared. Instead, I responded to her attempts at conversation with measured, thoughtful replies that never betrayed a hint of the tumult beneath. I wanted her to feel the weight of my quiet disapproval in every shared glance and every word left unsaid. I knew that while a direct confrontation might shatter her, my method of silent, unyielding indifference would be far more devastating, a slow strangulation of the intimacy we had once known. In the midst of my silent war, I also found moments of unexpected clarity. Late one evening, as I sat alone with the soft hum of the television in the background, a white noise that had become the soundtrack of my inner world, I allowed myself a rare moment of introspection. I thought about the man I had been before this betrayal, the husband who had trusted unreservedly and loved without reservation. I wondered if that man still existed somewhere beneath the layers of calculated indifference and mounting evidence. In that quiet, introspective moment, I realized that my journey was about more than just revenge, it was about reclaiming my own sense of self. I was determined not to be defined solely by the betrayal, but to forge a future where my silent retaliation would serve as a stepping stone toward my own healing. The paradox of my existence in those days was that every act of quiet retribution also became an act of self-preservation. By channeling my pain into meticulously recorded evidence and deliberate, measured responses, I was slowly constructing a new identity, one that was not the broken, vengeful husband of the past, but a man who had learned to harness his anguish and transform it into strength. I became a scholar of betrayal, a quiet observer who turned every subtle clue into ammunition for my silent war. And though I felt the sting of every lie and every stolen moment, I also discovered within myself an unexpected reservoir of resilience. I continued to document every detail, every observation, with an almost obsessive precision. The ledger of my silent revenge grew thicker with time, its pages a testament to the careful, unyielding scrutiny I had directed at our life. I revisited our shared history with a critical eye, seeking out moments when her behavior had strayed from the norm, when her words had held a double meaning that I had chosen to ignore. Each new piece of evidence was a reminder that the life we had built together was nothing more than an elaborate charade, a performance in which I had played the role of the oblivious husband while she had rehearsed her own betrayal behind closed doors. As the season changed and the leaves outside turned from green to gold, I felt that my silent revenge was nearing its culmination, a crescendo of carefully planned moments that would eventually force her to confront the truth. I envisioned the day when the mounting pressure of her own guilt would lead her to unravel, when the meticulous records I had kept would no longer be able to be ignored. That day, I believed, would be the moment when the true cost of her betrayal would be laid bare, a moment when the delicate equilibrium of our lives would collapse under the weight of its own deceit. In the meantime, I continued my daily rituals with a stoic calm that masked the tumult beneath. I attended social gatherings, interacted with friends, and even participated in family events, all the while keeping a careful watch on her every move. My silence, meticulously maintained, was both a shield and a sword. It protected me from the immediate shock of confrontation and simultaneously sharpened the knife of my retribution. I realized that the art of silent revenge was not about explosive outbursts or dramatic gestures, it was about the quiet, unyielding accumulation of truth, layer by imperceptible layer, until the facade crumbled under its own weight. I began to see that this silent war was as much about reclaiming my own dignity as it was about exposing her betrayal. In each carefully measured step, I was learning to navigate the complex interplay of pain, pride, and forgiveness. Even as I meticulously recorded every incriminating detail, I also started to reflect on the life I wanted to rebuild, a life where trust would be earned and where the scars of the past would serve as reminders of my strength rather than chains that held me back. By the end of those tumultuous months, my inner world had become a gallery of hidden truths and quiet revolutions. The silence I maintained had grown into a powerful statement, one that said, "I see you, I know your secrets, and I will not be broken by them." And while I never allowed my outward demeanor to betray the storm that raged within, I felt an inner transformation taking place, a slow, inexorable shift from the depths of betrayal toward the possibility of a new beginning. In this crucible of silent retribution, I discovered that sometimes the most devastating acts of revenge are those that are never seen, never heard, a masterful orchestration of silence that speaks volumes in the absence of words. I embraced the duality of my existence, the husband who appeared unperturbed on the surface and the quiet avenger who carefully dismantled the web of deceit behind closed doors. It was a journey marked by paradoxes, where love and betrayal, trust and suspicion, coexisted in a delicate, volatile balance. And so, I pressed on, each day a deliberate step toward the ultimate reckoning of her actions. I knew that the masterpiece of my silent revenge was nearing completion, a culmination that would force the truth into the open and demand accountability in ways that were as subtle as they were profound. Even as the pain of her betrayal continued to echo in my heart, I began to understand that the true victory lay not in her public undoing, but in my own ability to reclaim the parts of me that had been buried beneath the weight of her lies. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours, when the world still lay hushed beneath a blanket of darkness, I finally witnessed the culmination of my silent masterpiece. The slow, unyielding process of my retribution had reached its apex, and as I watched the fragile walls of our shared world begin to crumble, I felt both a shattering sorrow and a resolute liberation. The masterpiece of silence I had constructed over months was no longer an abstract act of vengeance. It had materialized in the unraveling of every carefully hidden secret, every whispered lie. And yet, as the inevitable day broke through, I realized that the true victory was not in the ruination of her carefully crafted illusions, but in the reclamation of my own soul. That morning, the air was crisp, the sky awash of tentative light, as if nature herself was aware that something monumental had transpired. I had orchestrated one final act, a quiet but decisive gesture that would force her to confront the consequences of her betrayal without uttering a single word. In the weeks prior, I had left subtle reminders around our home, a series of meticulously arranged photographs capturing moments from our happier past, juxtaposed with printed pages from my journal that catalogued the minute evidence of her secret liaisons. I had arranged these items in a way that, when discovered, they would paint a picture of undeniable truth, a silent montage of our once shared dreams and the stark reality of her infidelity. As I sat in the study, I listened to the soft patter of rain against the window, each drop echoing in the empty silence. The house was quiet, a solemn stage awaiting the unfolding of a final act. I knew that by the time she returned, every piece of my carefully orchestrated narrative would be in place, a visual and emotional ledger of our demise, set to dismantle the illusions she had long clung to. In that moment, a part of me trembled with anticipation, while another part, scarred by betrayal, felt a heavy resignation. The irony was not lost on me. The more meticulously I had constructed my silent revenge, the more I had come to understand that revenge itself was a bitter, double-edged blade that had etched deep scars on my heart. When the front door creaked open later that morning, I met her in the foyer, an image of composure that barely concealed the tumult within her. Her eyes widened as they took in the arrangement before her. Our living room transformed into a gallery of our shared past and her hidden transgressions. I said nothing. Instead, I watched as shock and dawning horror battled across her features, each moment of silence between us speaking volumes more than any harsh words could have. In that pregnant pause, I saw the weight of her deception settling upon her shoulders, and for a fleeting moment, the power of my silent retribution felt absolute. Her hands trembled as she reached for a framed photograph, a snapshot of us laughing together during a summer vacation, a time when love had felt pure and untainted. Nearby, a page from my journal lay on a polished table, the ink detailing the secret meetings and hushed texts that confirmed her betrayal. She stared at it, her eyes filling with tears, as if each word was a blow that left her more exposed than she had ever allowed herself to be. I could not bring myself to speak. The silence that I had nurtured was now a living thing, resonating with the gravity of our ruined trust. In the ensuing hours, as she sat alone in the now transformed living room, the truth of her actions hung heavy in the air. I left her to that solitude, my own heart a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. I felt neither triumph nor unbridled anger. Instead, I was enveloped in a profound melancholy. I realized that while I had succeeded in unveiling her betrayal through silent, deliberate means, the cost of my actions was written across both our lives. The truth, so meticulously exposed, had come at the price of an irretrievably fractured love and the loss of what we once shared. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home grew thick with an unspoken grief. Friends and family, drawn by the gravity of the scandal that had slowly seeped into the public sphere, expressed their sorrow and disbelief. Their words, intended to comfort, only deepened the chasm between us. My wife became withdrawn, her once vibrant presence reduced to a shadow of regret. I, too, was caught in a liminal space, torn between the satisfaction of having exposed the truth and the emptiness that revenge had brought into my soul. I spent long evenings wandering the silent halls of our home, the echoes of our past conversations a constant reminder of what had been lost. In the solitude, I began to reflect on the nature of my silent vengeance. It was, in many ways, a masterpiece of restraint, an intricate dance of observation, documentation, and quiet retribution. Yet, it was also a monument to the cost of betrayal. The more I had sought to reclaim my dignity through silence, the more I had surrendered a part of myself to bitterness. I recognized that I had become a man defined not by the love I once knew, but by the calculated indifference with which I had responded to it. One afternoon, as I sat at our dining table, its surface now cleared of clutter and stained only by the faint imprint of past laughter, I began writing once more. This time, however, my words were not weapons but invitations to healing. I wrote of the pain and the complexity of my journey, of the moments when I had felt both the searing sting of betrayal and the quiet promise of renewal. In each carefully chosen sentence, I attempted to capture the duality of my existence, the man who had enacted silent revenge, and the man who, in the depths of his solitude, yearned to reclaim a life of authenticity and love. I reached out to a close friend, a confidant who had been by my side even before the cracks in our marriage began to show, and shared with him the heavy burden of my remorse. We talked for hours about the nature of vengeance and its unforeseen consequences. He reminded me that sometimes the only way to heal is to let go, to allow the wound to become a scar that serves as a testament to survival rather than a mark of eternal bitterness. His words, tender and unassuming, began to chip away at the hardened shell I had built around my heart. Gradually, I sought to rebuild what had been so ruthlessly dismantled. I started attending a support group for those who had suffered betrayal in their intimate relationships. In the quiet, confessional meetings, I listened to the stories of others, each narrative a painful echo of my own, yet also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. There, amid shared tears and tentative smiles, I began to understand that true revenge was not about inflicting further pain on those who had wronged me, but about freeing myself from the perpetual cycle of retribution. It was about reclaiming the fragments of my identity that had been overshadowed by anger. The path to healing was neither linear nor swift. There were days when the weight of the past pressed down on me so heavily that I would sink into a vortex of sorrow, haunted by memories of whispered conspiracies and secret rendezvous. But as the seasons changed, so too did my perspective. I took up long walks in the crisp autumn air, where each step along the leaf-strewn path became a meditation, a deliberate act of moving forward despite the lingering pain. I began to rediscover the simple joys of life, the warmth of a sunrise, the gentle hum of conversation over coffee, the solace of a well-loved book. Slowly, I learned to appreciate that healing was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it into a new, more compassionate understanding of myself. One pivotal day, as I stood by a quiet lake watching the mist rise from its surface, I experienced a moment of clarity. The water, calm yet ever-shifting, reminded me that even the most stagnant heart can find renewal. I realized then that my silent revenge, for all its meticulous planning and calculated execution, had only deepened the wounds of my soul. I recognized that while I had exposed her betrayal to the world, I had also locked myself in a prison of my own making, a prison built from the very silence I had wielded as my weapon. It was in that moment that I resolved to embark on a new chapter, one where forgiveness and self-healing would be my guides rather than the cold, unyielding pursuit of retribution. I began to reach out, to my therapist, to my support group, and even to my estranged wife. I wanted to understand if there was a way to bridge the chasm between us, not to restore what we once had, but to find some semblance of closure and mutual healing. In a carefully arranged meeting at a neutral cafe, I sat across from her. There were no harsh words, no dramatic confrontations, only a quiet, sorrowful conversation marked by long pauses and tearful acknowledgments. She, too, seemed burdened by the weight of our shared past. In that fragile moment, we both realized that the relentless pursuit of silent revenge had only deepened our isolation. The conversation did not lead to forgiveness or reconciliation. It simply allowed us to recognize that we were both victims of a love that had decayed under the weight of hidden truths. That meeting, as painful as it was, became a turning point. I understood that true healing would require me to let go of the bitterness that had once driven my every action. I could not undo the past, but I could shape my future by embracing a path of self-compassion and renewal. In the weeks and months that followed, I made a conscious effort to distance myself from the relentless cycle of retribution. I began to focus on rebuilding my life, one measured step at a time. I delved back into my passions. Writing became a conduit for my emotions, each page a declaration of resilience. Photography allowed me to capture moments of unexpected beauty in a world that had once seemed so desolate, and I even took up woodworking, finding solace in the tangible act of creating something lasting from raw, unyielding material. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. I started to smile genuinely again, to laugh without the shadow of vengeance lurking in every corner of my mind. I reconnected with old friends and forged new relationships that were built on honesty and mutual respect. I learned that the silence I had once wielded as a weapon could also be a source of profound introspection, a quiet space where I could rebuild the shattered pieces of my identity into something whole and beautiful. I came to see that while my silent revenge had served its purpose in exposing her betrayal, it had also left me with a void that no amount of retribution could fill. Only by confronting my own pain and learning to forgive, both her and, more importantly, myself, could I hope to move forward. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of amber and gold, I reflected on the long, winding road that had brought me to that point. The anger and sorrow of the past still lingered, like shadows that danced at the edges of my vision, but they no longer defined me. Instead, I had come to embrace them as part of my story, a story of betrayal, yes, but also of profound growth and transformation. I realized that the silent revenge I had so meticulously orchestrated was not the end of my journey but merely a painful chapter in a larger narrative of self-discovery and renewal. In that quiet moment of introspection, I made a solemn vow to myself. I would no longer allow the bitterness of betrayal to dictate the course of my life. I would use the lessons learned from my silent war, not to further hurt those who had wronged me, but to empower myself to live a life defined by authenticity, compassion, and inner strength. I began to see that forgiveness, while not an excuse for the pain inflicted upon me, was a key that could unlock the door to my own healing. It was a process, not an instantaneous release, and I understood that every day would bring its own struggles and triumphs in that regard. As the final remnants of that tumultuous chapter faded into the background, I found myself stepping into a future that, though uncertain, held the promise of renewal. I continued to nurture my creative pursuits, to cultivate relationships that honored honesty and vulnerability, and to honor the memory of the man I once was by striving to become someone wiser and more resilient. I knew that I would always carry the scars of betrayal, but I also knew that those scars were not marks of defeat, they were symbols of survival, proof that I had endured even the harshest of storms. Now, as I write these final reflections, I stand at a crossroads defined not by the ghosts of my past but by the bright, uncertain light of tomorrow. My journey through silent revenge has taught me that sometimes, the most potent acts of retribution are those that leave no outward trace, only the quiet, internal transformation of a wounded soul into one that is ready to embrace life anew. I have learned that true strength lies not in the loud, explosive release of anger, but in the measured, deliberate process of healing and forgiveness. Today, I choose to look forward with a heart that is open and resilient. I have decided that my future will be shaped not by the bitterness of what has been lost, but by the hope of what can still be built. A life where trust is earned, love is genuine, and every silent moment is a testament to the quiet power of redemption. I have come to understand that while betrayal may shatter the illusion of intimacy, it also provides an opportunity to rebuild a deeper, more authentic connection with oneself. And so, with every sunrise that follows, I am determined to write the next chapter of my life, a chapter defined by recovery, growth, and the enduring promise of a new beginning. This is my final reckoning, a pledge to honor my past without being imprisoned by it, to forgive not because I must, but because I deserve to live in the light of my own resilience. I now know that the silent revenge I once pursued was a necessary, if painful, catalyst for transformation. And as I step forward into each new day, I do so with the unwavering belief that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that from the ashes of betrayal, a stronger, wiser version of myself can emerge. In the end, the masterpiece of silent revenge is not measured by the ruin it brings to others, but by the rebirth it fosters within. I have learned that while the scars of infidelity and betrayal will always remain, they no longer define my every breath. Instead, they serve as a reminder of the profound journey I have undertaken, from the depths of silent agony to the triumphant embrace of forgiveness and hope. And so, as I close this chapter, I hold on to the belief that every ending is but the start of a new beginning, and that the power to heal, to rebuild, and to love again lies quietly within me, waiting to be awakened with each new dawn.